Nigel Farage has upset much of the liberal intelligentsia after stating that the Western world harbours some blame for the war in Ukraine. And despite the BBC trying to make out that Farage is some Putin worshipper, I think his take on this is actually quite nuanced and accurate.
Hang on a second. We've provoked this war. Of course it's his fault. He's used what we've done
we
as an
provoked
excuse.
the invasion of
Yes,
Ukraine.
and very interestingly, once again, 10 years ago when I predicted this, by the way, I'm the only person in British politics that predicted what would happen. And of course, everyone said I was a pariah for daring to suggest it. George Robertson, former Labour cabinet minister, who went on to become the Secretary General of NATO, has in the last couple of weeks said the war is a direct result of EU expansionism.
What I find most interesting about this situation is the line the globalists expect us to take regarding the Ukraine war. It's eerily reminiscent of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, which centred around bin Laden. It seems absolutely insane looking back, but we were expected to believe by George Bush and Tony Blair and the like that bin Laden and Saddam Hussein, etc., just hated us for being free. Now, obviously, I'm not a bin Laden supporter or a member of the Mujahideen, but if you look into bin Laden's reasoning, you do see there's two sides to every story. He didn't like the Western world because he felt that it backed the Zionist cause in Israel. He didn't like America because he felt that it funded militias in Middle Eastern countries and toppled governments. Further to that, he didn't like the presence of the American military in the Middle East. Now, of course, none of this means that I agree with bin Laden's vision of his holy war, but it does mean you can understand the situation in a three-dimensional way. And it seems to me that this is what Farage is trying to do in this situation. Of course, all wars are more complex than simple media narratives, but in a global sense, Ukraine is at the crossroads of two major spheres of influence. On the one side, you have the Western world led by the United States, which has funneled in billions into Ukraine. Now, ostensibly, that's just to allow it to protect itself, but we all know really it's to bring it into its globalist empire, and sooner or later, Kiev, if America wins, will have pride marches and mass immigration. Then on the flip side, you have Ukraine's historic oppressor in Russia, led by Putin, who seemingly wants to reawaken the legacy of Peter the Great. So Nigel Farage hasn't upset the BBC types wanting to have a more nuanced conversation. It's very simple. He's just offended the globalist narrative. There's also another dimension here in that many people are so sick and tired of the globalist narrative, they sympathise with Putin himself as some saviour of the West type figure. Yet personally, I'd say that veneration is somewhat misplaced. Putin himself has always seen himself as a Russian, not a European, and second to that, it seems to have more affinity with the Syrians, the Iranians, and the North Koreans rather than an Italian or a Dane. Though that this admiration does exist in some circles shows us something quite important, that many Europeans are craving a leader who actually cares about their own nation and their own people, rather than someone who sees their own country as an economic strip which is indistinguishable from any other globo-homo city in the Western world. These are just some of my thoughts, however. Do let me know what you think down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel.